Uh,
Okay, so I'd like to introduce Lori Meyer, who is a technical communicator with more than 35 years of experience designing, writing, and editing software, documentation, and online user assistance. She started her career as a technical editor and is currently a technical writer at a cybersecurity firm in Northern California. She has a master's in instructional technology, which I'd love to hear more about. Lori has been a member and volunteer for several STC communities in multiple roles, including chapter president, chapter secretary, program manager, and committee manager. She is serving the second of two terms as a director on the STC Board of Directors, and last year served as chair of the SEC Community Affairs Committee. In 2015, Lori was named an STC Fellow, which is awesome. And she will discuss tonight, as we can see, through the generations, the enduring value of technical communication. Thank you and welcome, Lori.
Oh, well, thank you, Rose, and thank you all for coming. I'm really pleased to have you join me as part of this presentation. This particular presentation has been something that I have thought deeply about over the years because I work with probably at least four generations of writers, developers, program managers, product managers. So I am working in a multi-generational environment right now. And I have a lengthy history in our profession, and I have never doubted for a moment, despite the massive changes our profession has gone through, I have never doubted for a moment the value that we can add. So I want to share a little bit more about that. I will tell you that a couple of years ago, I did deliver this presentation to a group of students at the University of Central Florida, TechCom students, because I wanted them to understand that they are entering a profession that matters and where they can add value. So this presentation focuses more on the, the working professional, although the content is very similar to what I gave to the students, because actually we're all in the same we're all in the same path. We're just, our pathways are a little bit divergent, but we're pretty much all on the same path. So Rose has already introduced me, so this is just, a brief summary of my experience and qualifications in this field. So what I'm going to do when talking about multi-generational perspectives on TechCom, I'm going to look at it through the lens of three windows, essentially. One, user advocacy. Two, the terms quality, design, and innovation, and how these terms intersect and how they might confuse some people, clarify for other people, and how they're interpreted. And this is especially important as we have our younger generations coming into the field because they're going to hear these terms, especially innovation. That's a big one that's talked about a lot more now than many, many years ago. And then also about just the generational differences and what we not only what separates us, but more importantly, what unites us. Because even though each generation brings their own history, their own perspective, their own level of experience into the job, it's important for us to see what our common areas are, where we can work together, and what value we can add, not just in spite of our generational differences, but how we can put them to work for us. So let's go after it. The first thing I want to talk about is user advocacy. Now, user advocacy is something that, we writers have always been concerned about, but the terms around it, user friendliness, usability, all of these terms involving what the experience is for the user, those haven't been discussed as quite as readily as they were in, let's say, the last 30 or so years. We've always been concerned about, making sure that our information was clear and accurate and, provided the reader with what they needed to do to get work done. But, the language around that has changed somewhat. So usability started to gain increasing focus sometime, after 1980 or maybe a few years earlier than that. And when we hear about usability, we often think of software use because the software part of technical communication has grown immensely. 50 years ago, there were probably a lot more hardware writers or medical writers or, writers that weren't involved in computer software tools. Now they are everywhere. And so user experience, once again, another term, you know, that's related to the whole user arena, that has actually become a subspecialty for technical communicators as we deal with um, generations that are coming in and using screens and other, electronic media rather than printed books, to absorb information and learn how to do a task. So all of this is, kind of mixed up in what we need to think about when we're thinking about who uses our documentation. So I want to talk about a couple of phrases here that you hear a lot. Um, the first one is thinking ourselves as the user advocate. And I have heard many writers say something like this: well, we're the user advocates because that's what they see as what sets us apart, what gives us special value, because there is often a lot of pressure on us to kind of prove our value. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that whole proving thing later, but we are the user advocates. That's how a lot of us see ourselves. So I want you to take just a minute, and I'm going to continue with the presentation, but just take a minute to look at this. We are the user advocates, and think about how that resonates with you. Do you feel comfortable with it? Are there any words in that sentence that trouble you or confuse you, or is there any other way that you would phrase this? And you can put some notes in the chat if you like, because we could certainly discuss it during the Q&A. But I just wanted to put this out there as something that I have heard, and maybe a lot of you have heard many times over the years. Now, right now, I'm going to tell you a couple of problems I have with this sentence. Two words that trouble me here: we and the. And the reason that I feel a little bit concerned about that is that yes, user advocacy is critically important, and it's important for us all to feel that we are user advocates. But this sentence says to me, it kind of almost sets us off like, we're the user advocates. The rest, other people just don't understand like we do. And there's almost a separateness, us, not us versus them, but just us and them. We get it, other people don't.
Yeah.
And that's really worrisome to me because we are all part of something that we're building. We're building a product, we're building a service, and everyone in our organization has a valuable part to play in that. And our part, we do have special knowledge about usability and users that maybe others don't have, but I don't know if this is the right term. So this is what I see. I see us as the first believers. And the first believers in terms of what we can teach others about the importance of empathizing with users, understanding their needs, their background, knowing your audience, things like that. And we, as first believers, can help enlighten others in the organization. We can help educate our teams. We can educate our managers, and encourage user advocacy throughout an organization. And I thought about this, and I was thinking, now if I were the CEO of a small software company, for example, and I would want everybody in the company to be an advocate for users. They may express that advocacy in different ways and through different skill sets, but I would want that to be everybody's job. And that's what we want to encourage too. We don't want to just set ourselves off, well, we're the user advocates. We are the first believers and the first teachers. of user advocacy. So it's absolutely critical that we never give up that role, but we want to, we want to enlighten, we want to mentor, we want to lead. We don't want to separate ourselves as the only people that really care about users, and we don't want to create that perception in any way. So another thing that we often hear is know your user or they are not you. And this is true. We are not our users. We're professional writers and professional communicators, and we're writing for people who do not are not in our occupation. We may be writing for a cybersecurity administration. You are not a cybersecurity administration. You might be writing for an airline mechanic who's repairing airplanes on a flight line. You're not an airline mechanic. You might be writing something for a radiologist who needs information about interpreting x-ray. You're not a radiologist. So we are not our users, but we do have something in common with all of these audiences, as diverse as they might be, because we are users also. We're all users. And I think what can help us is not only to understand our background, the background of our audiences, that's vitally important, but also to bring the general experience of a user of a tool that we want to use to get work done. So I recommend that people draw on their own user experience, even if it's very, very different from the audience that you're writing for. Think about a time that you had to take something out of a box and put it together and depend on the documentation to succeed in getting this thing put together and get it up and running. Think of how frustrated you must have felt if you were reading the documentation and it sounded like it started right in the middle, or it left out important steps, and you were sitting there and there was no way that you could figure it out. There were some things you could figure it out, and then you came to a dead stop, or the language was so poor or the grammar was so bad that it was just a complete distraction. So all of these things, you can keep in mind and take notes, keep a journal. Every time you are in the experience of being the user, the audience for whatever documentation, for whatever tool you're using, think about your own experience. How did the documentation help me? How did it fail me? How did it confuse me? What could I have done differently? Because all of that information you can apply to a varied range of audiences. It can help you be more empathetic to the people that you're writing about, especially if you get, the more acquainted you get with your users and what their background is, what their work environment is, what their skill set is, what their assumptions are. You can take your experience, combine it with that, and really they're still not you, but their you-ness is a little bit different, but they're you in some way because they are users like we are users. So this is a good way to know that, yes, you need to understand that you're not writing for someone who is doing the same type of work that you are, but you are writing for people who need clear, accurate, concise information, just like we do.
Yeah.
So that's what I would recommend for that, to just get a slightly expanded perspective on that. So the takeaway here is that I like to think of us as first believers. Now, at the beginning, we might be the first or only advocates for usability. People may not understand it. They may not think it's that important, or they may be, just preoccupied with other things and may not realize the importance of usability. That's where we can be teachers and mentors. So we can encourage user advocacy throughout our teams and in our organizations. We can, if we think of ourselves as first believers, then we can communicate in a positive way how important this is, not just for me as a writer, but for everyone who works on this. Because ultimately, even though people express it in different ways, or some people might appear to be apathetic, everyone really wants to be proud of what they produce, and their part in it. whether it's writing, editing, quality control, you know, coding, anything, marketing. Everybody wants to feel proud of what they do and that the feeling that they contributed something valuable. And this is how we can make it even a small contribution to that effort. So now let's talk about three other terms that are sometimes, you know, very clear to some people, and sometimes they can be very, very difficult to sort out. So where do these terms intersect, and how are they interpreted, and how are they sometimes mixed up, or you know, where are they clear and where are they not? So first, let's talk about quality. Now, product quality wasn't talked much about before World War II because, you know, we were still building up a manufacturing economy, and then the Great Depression hit, and then World War II hit, and then we had to, you know, put all of our energy on building the ships and planes we needed to win the war. After the war, you know, people came home, you know, the war was over, people wanted to start building a nice economy for themselves. They wanted a home, raise families, and they wanted nice things in their lives, you know, because they had gone without for a long, long time between the Depression and World War II. So that's when advertising started to become very, very popular. And you started seeing ads on TV. And it's interesting because if you look at the history of advertising, which is really fascinating, um, there was a reflection on quality. You know, different brands as they emerged, they competed. Ours is better. Get our product. It's better than brand X. And this is especially true in the emerging market for consumer products and services. So they 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 sold quality. That's what they based a lot of their sales and their marketing on. So back in, you know, the late 40s, early 50s, 60s, you know, like Zenith radios and televisions, for example.
Yes.
The quality goes in before the name goes on. And United Airlines back in the 1950s, they called themselves the Extra Care Airline. And in the handout you're going to get after this presentation, I have an ad, a photo of an ad from United Airlines back. I'm not sure what the date is, sometime in the late 50s, where a pilot is talking about the fact that United was the only airline at the time that had radar on all their planes. So that enabled pilots to, you know, offer a safer flight because they could, you know, just get a better feel for what was going on around them. And so United called themselves not only the Extra Care Airline, but the Radar Airline, which I
Oh,
thought was
funny.
interesting. Yeah. And so they competed. And I was very sad when they dropped that phrase, you know, the Extra Care Airline, because, and unfortunately, a lot of companies have dropped these quality focused phrases. Maytag came up with a brilliant campaign about how dependable their washing machines were. And they had this Maytag repair guy, um, and he was lonely because these darn Maytag washing machines were so darn dependable. He didn't have anything to do, and he just sat around waiting for a machine to break down, and they didn't break down. So the tagline on TV was, "Not all Maytag repairmen are this lonely, but we're trying." And it was humorous, but they made their point. Our machines are the
Hmm.
best. They're quality. You can count on them. So that's what kind of drove a lot of consumer advertising back then. And you know, back there was a point at which you could mention competitors' brand names, but back when these ads were on television, you could not mention the competitor's name, so you had to say brand X. And I thought that was kind of funny, but I I didn't, you know, when I researched this, I didn't realize just how much emphasis on quality there was. And, you know, other products like food, like if it's Borden's, it's got to be good, you know, the milk. And, you know, things like you can be sure if it's Westinghouse for their appliances.
Yeah.
So all of these things, you know, quality was really big. Now, attaining quality, that was another story because quality is often obtained through substantial time investment,
Yeah.
repetitive work, boring, repetitive work, testing and repeated failures. And this was required because so many times they didn't know what was blocking the quality. So they had to try it over and over and over again. And this was a remarkable example was in the Mercury space program. So after the first 7 astronauts were chosen for the program, their next job was they had to find a way to build a rocket that could that the space capsule could sit atop of, and the rocket would have enough strength and thrust to project that spacecraft into the air, into outer space. And we had a terrible time getting that first rocket to be successful. And there was a lot of pressure on the United States because the Russians had put Sputnik up in 1957, and we were scared that they were going to, get a rocket up there first and all this other stuff. So there's a movie, I don't know if you've seen the movie The Right Stuff about the Mercury space program. If you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend it. Fascinating movie. But they had one scene where the astronauts were watching as some rocket tests were happening. Every single test failed. Um, First, the rocket would go up and then go, explode on the ground. Next rocket, it would go up. These were all, they didn't have any people in them, of course. They were just unmanned. And so one rocket would go up and explode in the air. Another rocket would, they'd do the countdown, nothing happened. It would just go pop. And so the astronauts watched day after day as these rocket failures, and they were really, really discouraged. Finally, they got a rocket, I believe it was the Redstone rocket, to work. But what they went through to get that darn rocket to project into space was really, really a challenge. And so when Alan Shepard went up in April of 1961, or May of 1961, that was a huge victory for the space program. And as we all know, later on in the program, there were some, you know, failures that took people's lives, which is very, very tragic. But in general, the only way that they could get quality and fix things and succeed from Mercury to Gemini to Apollo was just keep doing it over and over again. Something failed, throw it out and start all over again. Another example of what it takes to get quality is the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, the bridge itself took 4 years to build, but for years and years, it was considered impossible because the strait between San Francisco and Marin County, of course, that's rough, cold, windy area, rough waters, rough ground, underwater, and a lot of people thought, can't build a bridge there. It's not possible. And then as some successful bridge technology was being applied in the eastern part of the United States, people began to rethink this. So around 1918, people started thinking, well, let's see if we can come up with an idea to build a bridge. What do we need to do to get a bridge across the Golden Gate Strait? And so, several engineers proposed designs, and they had to throw a lot of them out. They had to figure out how to build the towers, build the cables, all of that stuff. And Joseph Strauss, who was a bridge engineer, came up with a great plan. Not the most aesthetic or beautiful design, but it was a good plan. So finally, there was a belief that we could build a bridge. And then, there were tons of objections because the only way you could get across the strait was by ferry, and the Union Pacific Railroad was making a ton of money transporting people across the strait by ferry, and they didn't want to have a bridge there that people could drive across themselves. But, after a number of legal battles, everything was cleared. The funding for the bridge was approved by referendum. The bridge started construction in 1933, finished in 1937 on time and within budget. And that bridge exists today. It's become an icon for San Francisco, and they keep it very well maintained. It does take a lot of maintenance to keep it up, but it's been well worth it. It's been, a way for people to get up back and forth between the city and the northern counties. And you know, but there was just a lot of work and a lot of effort, They had to move from the impossible perception to the possible, and then they had to figure out how to do it, and all that part actually took longer than it took to build the bridge. So I was kind of inspired by the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, there were 11 people lost their lives building that bridge, but when you think about the massive effort that it took to design and construct that bridge, um, you know, I mean, 11 lives is 11 lives too many, but, it's almost a miracle that more lives weren't lost. So, um, it's very inspiring. I love to see pictures of the bridge. When I walked across the bridge myself, I was just thrilled to walk across this icon in Northern California. Now, quality um, started being talked about as a corporate value right around, I don't know, early 1980s. And if you've heard of Dr. Edwards, and he has an S on the end of his first name, Deming's 14 points for quality management. This was kind of something that was circulated around, and I have a link to it in the handout if you want to look at his 14 points. But just
Wow.
basically kind of as a value, corporate value. And then we started hearing about quality circles, and they were very popular in Japan in the 1980s. But somehow that idea just never caught on with American corporate leadership. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard quality circles discussed in your companies. I have never heard it in any company that I've ever worked for. I've never heard about a quality circle. But there is concern about quality, but it's just I don't think that there is really a clear-cut definition of quality. And that's really kind of a tough thing for some people because I know in our profession as technical communicators, I think some of us have the general idea, which is right on target, is that, quality is something that we produce and give to customers that enables them to succeed in the job that they need to do with the instructions we provide. I mean, that's quality. And then there are other things, there are aesthetic matters and everything that go into that. But generally, we produce a reliable product for our customers, and that is the words that we write and how we organize them. Now, innovation is something that we hear about a lot, and younger people coming into the profession are probably going to hear this a lot more than we heard it when we older folks were starting out. I never heard the word innovation at all connected with my job as a technical communicator. Now, Oxford American Dictionary defines innovate as to make changes in something established. So you've got something already established, especially by introducing new methods, ideas, or products. Now,
Hmm.
that's not a bad definition, but I think it's something that maybe some people don't visualize it quite in that way because innovation
No.
nowadays is something seen as almost like you know, you go into a whole new arena of things. And, there's a lot of creativity and excitement about it and things like that. But the interesting thing about innovation is years and years ago, um, some of the most prolific innovators did not call themselves innovators, and they didn't see their work in terms of innovation. Instead, they were driven by curiosity. They just wanted to take something good and make it better, or they wanted to build something from the ground up. They
Hmm.
were intrigued by the challenge. They were intrigued by a desire to make a difference in human lives. When Edison gave us the incandescent light bulb, I mean, he had to go through a lot of failures himself, but boy, that little light bulb, made a huge difference. It was a big game changer for America overall. Another example we don't hear quite as much about is George Westinghouse. And I'm going to have some links to Mr. Westinghouse in the handout you're going to get because he had a really fascinating history. He owned more than 300 patents. He was a quintessential tinkerer. When he was 15 years old, he went to work in his father's factory and he loved to just mess around with stuff and try to build new things. And when he was 17 years old, the Civil War struck and he joined the Union Army, served for a couple of years, came back out, and just, kept tinkering, and he was trying to focus on things and see what things he could build that would be useful to people. And the the game changer for him that made a huge difference in the railroad industry was his invention of the air brake system. Before that, to stop
Mm.
a train was a huge, confusing, convoluted, dangerous effort. Every car on a train had a separate brakeman who had to
Oh,
stand and turn this wheel-like thing. So when the engineer had to stop the train for any reason, he had to start, with the first brakeman, and then they had to get the word all the way back to the last one and however many cars there were on the train. But unless they applied their brakes for each car in harmony, the cars could crunch together, some of them could fall off the tracks, and, you know,
yeah.
that cost some people their lives. It was a very bad system, and it was not safe. Train travel could be quite risky with that. Well, Westinghouse came up with an air brake system that enabled the engineer to apply one air brake that would stop the train, and it would stop the train sooner, a lot sooner than these manual air brake systems that were in existence before, because sometimes to get that train to stop with the old system, the train would have to cover up to 2 miles of track before that train could stop. So with Westinghouse's air brake system, that problem was solved, or at least very greatly resolved. And that air brake system is still in use in the railroading world today. It was a major, I would call it an innovation, in the sense that it took something existing and made it different and better. But I don't think Mr. Westinghouse considered himself an innovator. He just wanted to, you know, use his knowledge to make something better. And so that's what he is known mostly for. And I think that innovation is seen not quite on those terms
Oh,
now, because innovation is discussed very widely in corporate circles these days. And some companies now have entire jobs or departments that focus on innovation. There are companies that have a department of innovation, or they have things like hackathons or something like that to encourage what they call innovation. And if innovation can be applied to, improve quality and make something better and safer and more valuable to customers, then that's all to the good. Unfortunately, that concept of innovation sometimes just gets mixed up with a lot of different other things. There may be political considerations, or there may be priorities that get mixed up. And so sometimes it's very difficult to get a real clear picture of what innovation means. And so for people coming into the profession, um, they may hear this word innovation and they may think, oh, wow, well, I want to go where the innovation is because they're probably working on the coolest stuff. Well, maybe or maybe not. So those of us who have, who are veterans in this profession, I think what we can do that would be valuable to our younger cohorts is, to kind of help them understand that innovation has, many facets to it, and that you don't always have to quote go where the innovation is to do interesting and valuable work, because it just there's no real clear, even though it's defined in the dictionary, there's no real clear vision of it, no real clear perspective. And because it tends to be kind of all over the place. And in your handout, you'll see a picture that I did. I pasted in here about um, design thinking, because that's tied to innovation. And that's another new phrase. And I still don't know what it means myself. But they define 4 stages of design thinking. You know, clarify, ideate, develop, and implement. And, that sounds like a good plan. And, it may either result in innovation or require an innovative mindset to complete those steps successfully, but it's still, you know, some companies may not even use that term. So, there's just a lot of, you know, variety and possible confusion. So it's important to understand that innovation does not just mean one thing in one place. Now, design is another phrase that can sound very exciting, or it can also be very confusing, because design can mean a technical specification. For example, there was a design for the Golden Gate Bridge. They had to figure out, how to, um, put the towers and the cables together, and how to design the structure of the bridge, to make it work and make it safe. Um, there's a design for a new aircraft. I mean, everything, you know, is reflected in design. So there's a very functional aspect of it. In more recent years, there is more discussion than there was before about the aesthetics of design, and that's more about the visual appeal. So if you have a phone, like the iPhone, for example, there's been a lot of talk about how it's designed, whether it's square or got rounded corners or what colors they have. There was one designer at Apple who said his dream was to develop or design an iPhone that was as thin as a credit card. Now, why he felt that was important, I have no idea. He did not tell us. Um, and it was, you know, all I could think of was, well, why? Why does that matter? I don't care if my smartphone is thin as a credit card, as long as I can make calls and do email and do what the phone's supposed to do. I don't care if it's thin as a credit card. I don't need that. But, so we see a lot more about design in terms of, that sort of aesthetics and visual appeal. And that can be very good for marketing and selling a product, but we do have to be careful that that is not the only way that design is applied. You know, design is applied to the very, very functional, less glamorous parts of developing a product as well. So that's one thing that I think we seasoned professionals can help mentor younger people coming in, just to let them know that design can be a pretty big tent, and there are lots of ways that you can work with a design concept. And once again, you don't have to work on the coolest, hippest stuff. You can make a lot of contributions in many ways under the design umbrella. So where do innovation and quality merge, or how are they separate? And this is something that, I think that both we as technical communicators and anybody should really think about this. For example, I believe that quality could be possible without innovation, because sometimes quality is attained, as we talked about before, by just, trying and failing, and getting it right. So another question that occurred to me is innovation possible without quality? That is a question that, could prompt a lot of discussion, but I think it's worth exploring, because I don't even know myself. So the takeaways from all of this are, when you talk about quality or design or innovation, you have to consider the context. What are we talking about here? And in what environment are we talking about it? And these concepts don't always intersect, and sometimes they may seem confusing and in conflict with one another. And it's important for people not to be afraid of boredom, because sometimes you have to just do very routine tasks to get something to work right, to get something you can be proud of. You just have to do it over and over and over again, and you don't get to work on the fun stuff. But I think it's important for people coming into the field now to understand that there will be times when that is what you're going to be spending your days on, just doing it over, rewriting, rewriting the same paragraph, even the same sentence, redesigning the same page, redesigning the same microcopy on a screen. You just have to keep doing it over and over again until it feels right, until you know that this is good for your users. So all of those things are important. Now, what about the generations? Because a lot of us are working with 3, 4, and sometimes even 5 generations now. So there are a lot of different generations in the workplace now. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing is that not necessarily just among technical communicators, but in the whole perspective of generational discussion itself, there seems to be a lot of focus on the differences, more so than ever before. We talk about every generation has a name, the baby boom generation, Generation X, Generation Z, millennials, and then sometimes there are terms that are less than flattering, like the slackers or whatever else. And that's really quite unfortunate because these differences um, can take precedence over what really unifies us and what needs to unify us. For example, we often talk about, well, this is the digital generation, or that's the baby boom generation, or, this is the, TikTok generation or whatever. And, this generation. And I hear that word so much now, far more than I did when I first entered the tech comm field, well, 40 years ago now. Boy, I feel so old. But, it can become technology especially can become a generational flashpoint, especially in the workplace where the idea is younger equals better. You've probably heard people say things like, well, if you want to know about the internet, ask a 12-year-old. And well, maybe, but maybe not. And a phrase that I've heard, I heard this first about 30 years ago, and some of you may have heard it now. A question: can you teach my father how to use the internet? And I thought about that, and I was thinking if I were to answer that question, I would say something like, well, yes, I can probably teach your father how to use the internet, but I will bet you that my 52-year-old father can teach you how to use the internet, because there's an assumption, unfortunately, too often, that only younger people really want, they're interested in the most modern technology. But my father, um, who was 52 years old when he died, and he died before the internet, before Windows, before Mac, before MacBooks, before social media, before iPhones and tablets and everything else. He did not know about any of that when he died. It all happened, way after he was gone from this earth. And I feel sad sometimes because if he were alive when those things evolved, he would be the quintessential early adopter. And he was it was kind of humorous in a way because he had his own small investment banking firm. And whenever there was anything new, he would go right out and get it. And I'm convinced if, for example, the MacBook Pro and the iPhone and everything were available in his time, his office would have been full of MacBook Pros. Well, everybody in staff would have iPhones and iPads. His admin would be doing everything on a tablet or an iPhone. He'd have probably 2 iPhones. He loved trying out new things. And I remember when I was a kid, when the first Xerox desktop copier, the small one, not the big standalone ones, but when Xerox finally came out with small desktop copiers you could put on a table or something, my father went right out and got one for his office. And he made some copies and brought her home to us kids. He goes, "Hey kids, look at this." And it wasn't those old-fashioned white on black photostats. This was a real photostatic copy, and it was fascinating. But he just loved his desktop copier, and he was the first. Nobody else, none of his colleagues had one. So you really have, and there are a lot of people like my father around who are older who do, love to be early adopters. They love this stuff. You know, a woman I know gave her 100-year-old grandfather an iPad for his birthday, and he loved it. Um, so, you know, you just never know. You really have to, you know, not make assumptions. You know, one of my cousins was taking a course in Microsoft Word, and she said that she was middle-aged at the time. I think she was in her 50s, and the teacher told her, "No wonder you're having trouble with it. It's your age." And it's like, holy cow. And I told her, don't believe that for a second. You are as smart as you are, you know, bright as a penny. You can do this. It's not your age. You're as sharp as a tack. And she was comforted by that. So, you know, what we can do again is, you know, our age can be an advantage to us as mentors to people to help them to put some of this generational difference aside. Now, one of the things that makes this complicated is you see a lot of charts like this. There are zillions of these charts around. We've got baby boomers, we've got Gen X, we've got millennials. Now we've got Generation Z. And unfortunately, I think this chart was made before, you know, Z uh, people hit the workplace. But as you can see, they have some characteristics here. And some of this it's, you know, it's true, but, you know, there are other things like under baby boomers, cons, less adaptable, less collaborative. Oh, well, it depends on the individual. Some are, some aren't. Gen X, cons, less cost effective, says who? Less executive presence. What does that mean? Millennials, cons, lazy, says who? Unproductive, says who? You know, self-obsessed, says who? You know, so these are not only negative, but, you know, often very inaccurate. You know, I work with millennials and Generation Z and Generation X. I'm a baby boomer, but they are, you know, they vary according to their skills and their attitude. It has nothing to do with the year they were born. So, you know, it's easy, you know, to see this because so much of the media focuses on, you know, oh, this is the digital generation. And yes, there are differences in that regard. For example, millennials grew up reading on screens. We didn't have that experience. We grew up reading printed books. So yes, there is a difference there, but it doesn't mean that millennials cannot come to appreciate the history behind why we went from books to screens. And we can appreciate what the needs of, you know, people who are used to working with screens, what they need to absorb that information and use it to be successful. So there are adaptations that can be realized on both sides. And that's what's important. That's what makes teamwork. So, you know, it's very important to understand also that every generation has a valuable history. What unites us provides as many insights as what separates us. We are many and we are one. You know, we're different experiences, you know, different mindsets, but we are one in the sense that if we are working towards a common goal, then we can work as one. And clarity and accuracy, especially for us in our work, they respect no generation. That value is timeless. You know, no matter what we do, no matter what media we put it in, if it's not clear and accurate and helps the user succeed in what they need to do, nothing else matters. So the last thing I want to say about this is that some values know no generation. The ability to lead, not manage, lead, and to listen. You know, the world is hungry for people willing to listen. Listening is just so desperately needed. And to mentor, not to so much to direct as to mentor, to teach. A commitment to focus on giving our best. You can do that at any age, in any generation. A belief in our profession. And that is one thing that has not wavered for me in all of these decades. I have never once doubted, despite all of the, you know, all the things we've heard over the years. It's like, oh, our jobs are all going overseas, if you're a writer, it's all over for you. You got to do something else, or you have to reframe your career or something. And there have been a few adjustments, yes, you have to make, and jobs have gone overseas. But in general, our profession, the value of our profession holds. And I don't believe, this is my personal belief, that we need to prove our value as much as we need to believe it and live it every day. Everything we do every day is based on our belief in the value of what we're doing. And that is what drives us forward. And the last thing that knows no generation is courage. And I want to refer you to, and you'll see this in your handout, there is a link to a video by President Kennedy when he gave his what he called moon speech at Rice University, where he talked about we, we, we aim to go to the moon and do these other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And he said in that speech, he said, even though we don't know what this is going to bring, this is mostly an act of faith. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. We have no idea what the outcome is going to be. But he said, if we can apply quality and if we can make this thing work in challenging environments in space and do it right and do it first, we must be bold. And I absolutely love this. I mean, sometimes if I'm very discouraged, all it takes is for me to watch this speech. So it's absolutely critical that we believe in what we do and we're bold enough to do it. So I want to thank you once again for joining me, and we can have discussion. You can ask me questions while I find my charger to get my machine charged up again. So thank you very much. It was great. It was great presenting this to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you. And yes, if anyone has any questions before I turn off the recording, go ahead and ask.
How will we get the handout?
Well, I'm going to send it to Nikki, and she will make sure that y'all get it along with the copy of the slides.
If you have a PDF, you can actually put it in the chat.
Well, I do, but I've got to make one fix to the background in the slides. So, if you have the email addresses of the attendees, then is that one way we could do it? Could I?
We can put it on the website or somewhere accessible from the YouTube channel or wherever.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Okay.
Can we have discussion after the
Yeah, we can
recording
have
and stuff?
discussion after we turn off the recording, but I don't generally turn it off until the first few questions because they're usually of general interest, and then it's a judgment where they trail off and we start just talking.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
I'll do mine as a clarification.
Okay.
I just had a brief thing on since you brought up Westinghouse and the air brake. I just wasn't sure exactly what his innovation was. Did the air brake allow them to apply brakes on all the cars at once or something
Yes.
like that?
Yeah,
Okay, that was the reason. Okay.
Yeah, that was what made the huge difference because, each brakeman had to apply the brakes in that individual car of the train, and they had to be standing on top of the train and turn this wheel, and they had to do it in harmony. It was a terrible system.
Yeah.
So this was just a huge breakthrough. Yeah.
So now you can do one thing, and through the air passage, everything applies at once.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And you
that is
fire all those individual brakemen.
I know. Well,
Yeah, all those guys that lost their jobs, man.
I know. Well, it made it, actually Congress passed legislation shortly after Westinghouse got that air brake system going.
Yeah.
Now all trains have to have it. It was starting around 1869. It became law. that every train had to have Westinghouse's beverage system in it.
The other thing with Westinghouse was that I don't think he actually invented it. He worked it with Tesla, but he
Yeah.
was the first backer of alternating current.
That's right. I forgot to mention that. Yes, he was. And then, he and Edison were kind of, challenging one another because,
Oh yeah,
AC versus DC.
Edison conducted one of the first really vicious PR campaigns in
Yes,
which
he
he
did.
was claiming that alternating current was going to murder everybody and kill everybody, and it was dangerous. And
know.
you should,
Yeah.
have this direct current, which I own, instead of that other stuff. It was
Yeah.
really
Oh, I
vicious.
know. Yeah, that
They-
was.
He was going. I think he went around and electrocuted some elephants.
Yes, he did.
I think so. That was the one, when he tried to take on Westinghouse in that regard. That didn't reflect too well on Edison. But the thing about Westinghouse was that Westinghouse was not only a prolific inventor with all these patents, he was revered by the employees that worked for
Yeah,
him.
yeah.
He listened to them. I mean, he had all the qualities that we want, in a leader. And he was so good at what he did and so creative and so inventive. And, it was great. I wish we had more people in the world today like him.
Yeah, good.
Oh, Nikki, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question. You were talking about, quality, and I remember there was a total quality management
Oh, that's
in the early 1990s, because I
Yep.
remember as late as 1994, we had a consultant come into my software company that I worked at.
yes.
But I just, and they defined quality as meeting the customer's needs.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah,
which
Makes
is,
sense.
Yeah, that total quality was Deming, I think.
yeah, well,
Yeah,
Wasn't that Deming?
I don't know where the term TQM came from exactly.
mhm.
In the handout, there is going to be a link to a page all about Dr. Deming, and
Okay.
it can be it's 14 points. But you don't hear about that much these days either. And the idea, Nikki, that you had mentioned, meeting customers' needs, that pretty much sums it up.
Deming's stuff went the way of all of the other management fads that come and go every couple of years. And that is that they get one. I mean, I had some experience with Deming at one point. One, Deming he was a brilliant guy, but he wasn't that good a writer. So his books aren't real clear. The other thing is that most of the attempts to implement it were like the attempts to implement oh God, what's the other fad we got going now? Oh, the name skips me. But anyway, it'd get a half-assed implementation.
Yeah.
Agile is what you're thinking of?
Like one of the things that was big on Deming is he was very much on management by statistics, but you kept but in Deming's world, the only reason to manage by the statistics was to improve the process. So you redesigned the process, and he was very explicit about that you never use statistics to manage or punish the workforce.
Mhm.
And of course, that was universally what happened when it got applied, is that they then started counting everybody's metrics, and then firing the 10% that didn't produce enough, and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, it kind of went its way. And then we had ISO 9000, and that's come and gone.
Oh, I know.
Oh, good.
And Six Sigma, that's another one.
Six Sigma. Six Sigma.
Six Sigma,
I have never once heard any reference to Six Sigma in any company I've ever worked for. That's the weird thing about this. I never heard any of this stuff. Now Xerox did have a program called Leadership Through Quality, And every new employee had to go through what they call LCQ training. And actually, some of it wasn't bad, but it was pretty common sense stuff. They really didn't need a fancy name for it because quality doesn't need, I mean, quality is critical, but it's
Yeah.
not free and it's not easy.
Yeah.
And it's too bad that so many of these kind of faddish terms have come and gone, and
Yeah.
and then leadership, management by walking around, people thought that meant some sort of healthy type of leadership because the manager was in touch with you. No, doesn't work.
And then also some of the innovations actually wind up becoming destructive. Like there was a big fad on just in time. And the problem is the problem with
Oh, yeah.
the problem with just in time is it works for the bean counters right up into the point where you have a glitch and you suddenly find out you overdid it and now you don't have the supplies you need in order to be able to continue to produce.
Yeah, we
Yes,
found that in a big way during the pandemic.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
right,
yeah.
absolutely.
yeah.
And then
That
they
was-
begin to find out that redundancy
Yeah. That
is
was
a major part of having any kind of strength is having redundant systems. And of course, the bean counters hate redundancy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, Joe, I want to read something in the chat that Joe shared here. Joe Dudney. In the 1980s, I worked for a company that instituted quality circles. As I recall, they didn't last too long. One meeting, as I recall, we were told specifically that we could not discuss wages, hours, or working conditions. And then Lane Hamner says, when I contacted IBM in the mid to late 1980s, they had a whole department dedicated to winning the Malcolm Baldrige Award for implementing quality management systems. And then here's another one from Joe. I heard an anecdote in an interview on NPR. Early in the days of railroading, one town had a ceremony to welcome the first train to come to town. Two local politicians stood on the track as the train arrived. They died. They did not understand railroads and had expected the train to simply stop when the driver saw them waiting on the track. Oh my golly.
Oh, oh,
Yeah, well, when I think of a lot of this stuff, it reminds me of a thing about a company where they're reorganizing their org board, Guy
Hmm.
says, different org, but different trees, same monkeys.
all right. I think I'm going to stop the recording at this point. And
Yeah,
get really raunchy.
we probably would have been better off if that one hadn't got immortalized.